The most important decision you have to make in a car audio setup when it comes to speakers isn't your woofers, it isn't your tweeters, it isn't your subwoofers, it is your mid-range. Because 80 to 90% of the sound that you hear in your car stereo is going to be between 80 and 5,000 hertz. That's where most music is. If you have a good set of properly set up mid-ranges, the whole system is going to sound infinitely better. No kidding. And you got to cover the frequency. You got to cover is between, because your subwoofer is going to cover from, it can even cover up to 100, maybe a little higher, but usually somewhere around 80 hertz and down. And your tweeter is going to pick up about 3,000 hertz and up. Run of the mill. So you got to find a way to fill the gap between 80 hertz and 3,000 hertz. That's the objective. Okay, that's saying that your car has those generic settings. You got to fill that space. Now, there's multiple ways of filling that space. If you use a large driver to fill that space, it's going to give you a lot warmer mids, a lot warmer low-end vocals, a lot better drums. It's going to give you a lot better male vocals, tenor sax, stuff like that's going to come through really well. It's not going to do as well on high female vocals, electric guitars, high-pitched snares, things that get up in that 2,000 hertz range, 1,000 hertz to 2,000 hertz, up in that area. It's not going to do as well there. On the other hand, if you have a 3-inch driver, it's going to do those things well. The rock out guitars, high vocals, all that stuff. The 3s are going to do that really well, but it's not going to do the drums as well. So you have to trade off here. If you're doing a 3-way, meaning subwoofer, tweeter, and a mid, which is a really standard setup, the vast majority of people are running a 2-way component up front, which means their whole system is 3 components: subwoofer, mid, and tweeter. If you're running that system, you're giving up something somewhere. If you're running a small mid and tweeter, you're giving up the lower mids, the high bass, that fat part down there in the bottom where the kick drums and the tom-toms and the vocals and all that's going to be really thin and pushed up into those 3s and not going to have a lot of body to them. So it just all depends. If you're running a 3-way set up front, it's a lot more flexibility. It's a little bit more tuning to do. You got to have a little more electronics to run a 3-way set. You've either got to run a passive crossover and feed a signal into that, or you've got to run active on each of those speakers, or you can run partially active and passive like I do, where I'm running a little mid and a tweeter together on a passive crossover, and then I'm running the large mids and the doors on so 4 signals and 6 drivers. But it's and then there's the tuning aspect of it. You got to give this band to this driver, this band to this driver, this band to this driver, this band, to cover the whole suite. Then there's the problem where you have the crossover at. Okay, so let's say you've got your low mid on a 3-way up front. You got your low mid crossing over from like 70 hertz up to 500 hertz. And then you've got your high mid picking up at 500 and going up to wherever. The tricky bit is that point where they meet. Okay. that 500 hertz mark. That means if you need to have like a Linkwitz Riley 24 dB roll off, bloom, 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 to try to create a nice smooth transition between those two. If you don't get this transition right, what happens is, if someone is performing something that's ranging between 300 hertz up to 600 hertz, and it's going to be, you're going to notice this weird kind of a movement between the different locations that performance is coming through. If you get it right, get that crossover right, and you get everything right, you won't notice that. That's the idea of having a good tune, is you don't get that. But if you're not quite there, you will notice it. So it's almost any problem can be corrected with a proper electronic changing and manipulation. But in my experience, it's better to fix as many of those problems as you can by physically putting things in the right place and getting the right components to match up and play that naturally want to play the thing that you want them to play. You're not forcing anything to happen. They just want to do that. That said, there's a lot to be said for natural roll-off of drivers. You could use, so for example, with natural roll-off, let's say you've got your 6 playing in the door, playing 80 hertz, and then you don't give it a top. It just keeps going up. Okay? And then you got then you got a tweeter up there, and you need to roll that sucker off because you don't want to, drop the hammer on it. So you've got it playing up to infinity, but on the bottom, you got it cut off at like 3,000 hertz. So then your 6.5 is playing up there in the tweeter territory. Well, the driver itself is going to have a natural roll off. It's not going to want to play 20,000 hertz. It's not going to want to play 10,000 hertz. It might get up there in the 6 or 8K range, but it's going to start getting petering out. In other words, the physical ability for that driver to do this is just going to run out. You can only vibrate it so fast, and it's just not going to vibrate any faster. That's where natural roll-off is. And usually when you see a frequency range on a mid, you can consider that upper part, it's natural roll-off. It's just not going to vibrate any faster. The lower part of that frequency range this is where we're telling you to stop it, because if you go any lower than this, you're going to destroy the driver. The upper end of that frequency range you see advertised is its natural roll-off. Usually, it just won't play any higher than that. And I've actually set up my system without tweeters a couple of times to see if I could get my little threes to play tweeter, and they do, ish. They're not very good at it, but you could. You probably would think the tweeters were in there. If you don't know what you're listening for, you'd probably think there were tweeters in there. But yeah, they have to work hard. Now I don't have any top roll off on them when I normally run them, but I got them in a crossover network now, which actually crosses them over up in around 2K or 3K, brings in the tweeters somewhere up in there. So they're that passive crossover is handling them now. But whenever I run them active, before, I just let them go, man, because their natural roll off was like 14K or something like that, which is just almost at the end of my hearing anyway. And they, at 14K. Believe it or not, you're just about getting most of the meat from an MP3 file. That's a whole nother subject. But most of your MP3, your lower bit rate MP3 files, like YouTube, for example, it cuts off at 16K. You're not getting any information from YouTube over 16,000 hertz. Period. It's I've done some experiments with this, so I know for sure that at 16,000 hertz there is zero information, no matter what the song normally has, no matter whether it's a high res upload or whatever. 16,000 hertz is all you're hearing and below. But what I was getting at was those drivers will actually play up to that, pretty close to it, and which is why I said that you'd think they have tweeters in them. Just like when you're listening to YouTube music, you think you're hearing higher than 16,000 hertz, but you're not. So when it comes to mid-ranges, basically you want to cover that ground in the middle that you need covered. And me personally, I suggest either going with the larger driver if possible, or going with a three-way front stage, and letting the and then finding your own personal crossover point between your large mid and your small mid. Because having played with both, if you've got a small subwoofer or a reasonably low powered system, you're not going to get real loud. You're just chill. And you've got a smallish subwoofer and a sealed box or a setup like that, where that sub is pretty tight and can play 120 hertz real comfortably. Then and especially if it's like a pickup truck where the sub is much closer to you in the driving position, then you can cross those lower mids over kind of high, so they're not trying to play low end bass. If you got that set up, then a two-way will work just fine. If you got your Chevy pickup and you got a sub under the seat, maybe an 8 or a 10, and you can run that sucker up to 110, 120 hertz, and then you can bring in those doors at like 110 hertz or 100 hertz, and then have those in tweeters where you're leaving that power for those sixes to handle mostly that upper mid-range, and not trying to play the 80 hertz and 70 hertz and stuff. Then a two-way front stage would work fine. But if you've got big subs and you're playing lots of lows with them, you got them tuned down low, and you still want to get a really pretty front stage, then you're better off with a three-way setup up front, because you're going to need to be able to put some lower end up front to get the drums up there and to kind of tighten up that bass, to pull that sub sound to the front of the car, so that you feel the bass up front, not just behind you. You're going to want some lower end down there, a couple of 8s, maybe some 8-inch woofers up there, and then some 4 or 6-inch mid-ranges, or some 6-inch woofers with some 3 or 4-inch, 5-inch mid-ranges, and let them just focus on the vocal area, and then your tweeters on top. So it depends on the setup, your taste in music, what you intend to do with it, just a whole lot of stuff. Just a whole lot of stuff. But like I said, I prefer having a larger mid-range. Let me rephrase that. I prefer that the driver that's playing between 300, 400, 500 hertz up to like 3K, that area, I prefer that driver be a larger driver. Something that's 6 inches or bigger. Now I released a video earlier talking about my Tahoe, my current setup, where I've got my My mids cut off at 400 hertz. My little threes are picking up from 400 hertz and up, and 400 hertz down to like 100 or 90, or I forgot what it was. That's covered by my 6.5s. And that particular crossover point that goes between my door mids and my A-pillar mids, which right now is 400 hertz, usually it's 900 hertz. I moved it down to test that water. I've got enough flexibility between those two that I can move. Those drivers will handle 250 hertz, those little A-pillars, and those doors will play up to 1500 hertz no problem, or higher. They'll play just about full range. So I can move that crossover point around, and I've been experimenting with that. That's the only point that I keep changing around, is trying to see what this sounds like, and then I'll run it for a while, then I'll switch it up and move it to a different spot. If I want the sound warmer, I can pull it up to a higher point, and that lets the doors handle more of that range. But if I want the sound stage to be higher, I can pull that crossover down a little bit and let more of those 3.5s take over more of that job. So it just all depends. It's not an easy question to answer. But ultimately, you just got to fill in the gap. And the bigger the speaker you use to fill the gap in, probably the more you're going to like it. Anyway, guys, I hope this was helpful. I'm not going to pester you for subscribing, but you already know. You know what's up. And I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. You guys sit back, enjoy your family, enjoy your friends, and enjoy the life that you work hard to get to, and enjoy what you've got, because tomorrow it can be gone. Peace, guys.